Welcome to Show Don't Tell. Today's video is a bit different. I wanted to talk about two people and the books they wrote that inspired me to make this channel. I wanted to shine some light onto my own influences and explain why these people motivated me to make videos and do them in this particular way. Both of these people are women who wrote books in the 1960s in completely different fields. They're not household names, they never became celebrities, but their influence was enormous. You and I live in a world today that is a direct consequence of their ideas being put into action. The first name I wanted to share is Rachel Carson. In 1962, Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. Her book came at a very interesting time. The chemical industry had advanced enormously since the Second World War, producing pesticides like DDT, which were cheap, powerful, and used with no concept of caution or control. It was these environmental issues that inspired Rachel Carson to write Silent Spring. She wrote about how these pesticides didn't just kill pests, they killed many more things in their ecosystem, that eventually we would have a silent spring, as bioaccumulation of pesticides would poison all of the small birds, and we would no longer hear their singing from the trees to herald the coming of spring. After her book was released, it was met with opposition and accusations of fear-mongering, mainly from the chemical industry. Opponents didn't believe that human chemicals could ultimately affect the world we live in to such an extent. It was very much a predecessor to CFCs and even today's arguments about climate change. Sadly, Rachel Carson died in 1964, but over time public opinion began to swing firmly behind her. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was created in the United States, a consequence of the scientific environmental movement she had created, and the organochloride pesticides she named were banned from use in the United States and ultimately all over the world. Why is this significant to me? Well, Rachel Carson was right. That's what affected change. She was right. And ultimately, if you're right, if you're telling the truth of a situation, others will join you in sharing that truth, and that results in change. The second woman from the 1960s was called Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs was a community activist. She lived in New York, and in 1961 she wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. She began by leading opposition to the redevelopment of New York by Robert Moses, a fascinating figure in his own right, who was particularly keen on demolishing established neighbourhoods to build new roads and new tower blocks. She was one of the first people to question the outcomes that town planning and urban regeneration was inflicting on people in the 1950s. At the time, there was a huge drive to remove slum housing and replace it with the latest in designed development. In the UK, this was the heyday of council estates and tower blocks. It was cutting-edge stuff at the time. Urban planners believed we could build new neighbourhoods through their theories of human living and create better places for people to live. But Jane Jacobs, despite her lack of formal training, recognised and called out the truth. These new developments usually exacerbated rather than reduced social issues, and she proposed a number of theories like eyes on the street and mixed-use development as to why some neighbourhoods had been pleasant places for people to live. She used the metaphor that urban planning in the 1950s was rather like bloodletting, an elaborate pseudoscience shielded from critics by professionals who relied on promoting it for their entire careers, but without ever requiring evidence to support its effectiveness. I, for one, can't think of another case in which somebody with no formal training in a field has had so much influence on that field. After her protests defeated Robert Moses and her book was published, new movements began in urban development to avoid repeating the mistakes that had been inflicted on so many communities. People began to understand what made some neighbourhoods successful and what made people feel safe. And it's these women and how they presented their ideas that inspires me. First of all, show the truth to people about what is happening. As John Stuart Mill said, when an opinion is true, it may be extinguished once, twice, or many times, but in the course of ages there will generally be found persons to rediscover it, until some of its reappearance falls on a time when from favourable circumstances it escapes persecution until it has made such head as to withstand all subsequent attempts to suppress it. I'm not really a political person. In fact, I find political arguments unbelievably tedious. It's like having a couple on the verge of divorce round your house for dinner. They just bicker without end or reason over who was responsible for this and, well, when I was in charge we did that, and let's not forget what happened when you were left with it. Personally, I find it phenomenally tiresome and uninteresting, and I doubt if I'm the only one. I think most people just want to understand why the things around them happen the way they do, what made them that way, and perhaps how they could be made better. And if your view on a subject is based on myth or urban legend, things that simply are not true, that really grates with me. Somebody has told you something that isn't true simply to get you to support them. It's propaganda, it's demeaning to people you have brought on as allies in your cause. When I look into topics, I find it stunning just how misleading advocates can be. There's nothing worse than seeing a number used in a misleading context when the person who presents it must have read the document it comes from and knows they aren't representing the truth. And then of course people get frustrated that nothing ever changes. Well, I would hold up Carson and Jane Jacobs as people who prove the opposite. I would suggest that if you talk to people who are influential in an area, but lead off your argument with things they know are completely false, they are not going to listen to you. They will dismiss you immediately. They will not recognise you as credible or insightful. And although I do advocate my point of view on subjects, I also believe that whichever side you take on an argument, do it for reasons that are actually true, not on false and misleading suppositions. So thank you for watching this slightly different video. I thought it would be helpful to do it this way, rather than wedging it into an existing episode. Just leave it out there as a standalone subject for people to listen to. Hopefully you found the ideas new or interesting, or you just enjoyed learning about my examples. Either way, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.